Gleeman. The door of the inn banged shut behind the white-haired man, and he spun around to glare at it. Lean, he would have been tall if not for a stoop to his shoulders, but he moved in a spry fashion that belied his apparent age. His cloak seemed a mass of patches, in odd shapes and sizes, fluttering with every breath of air. Patches in 100 colors. It was really quite thick, Rand saw, despite what Master Olivier had said, with the patches merely sewn on like decorations. "The Gleeman," Egwene whispered excitedly. The white-haired man whirled, cloak flaring. His long coat had odd baggy sleeves and big pockets. Thick mustaches, as snowy as the hair on his head, quivered around his mouth, and his face was gnarled like a tree that had seen hard times. He gestured imperiously at Rand and the others with a long-stemmed pipe, ornately carved, that trailed a wisp of smoke. Blue eyes peered out from under bushy white brows, drilling into whatever he looked at. Rand stared at the man's eyes almost as much as at the rest of him. Everybody in the Two Rivers had dark eyes, and so did most of the merchants, and their guards, and everyone else he had ever seen. The Congers and the Coplans had made fun of him for his gray eyes, until the day he finally punched Ewell Coplin in the nose. Wisdom had surely gotten onto him for that. He wondered if there was a place where nobody had dark eyes. Maybe Lan comes from there, too.
"What sort of place is this?"
the Gleeman demanded in a deep voice that sounded in some way larger than that of an ordinary man. Even in the open air, it seemed to fill a great room and resonate from the walls.
"The yokels in that village on the hill tell me I can get here before dark, neglecting to say that that was only if I left well before noon. When I finally do arrive, chilled to the bone and ready for a warm bed, your innkeeper grumbles about the hour as if I were a wandering swineherd, and your village council hadn't begged me to display my art at this festival of yours. And he never even told me he was the mayor."
He slowed for a breath, taking them all in with a glare, but he was off again on the instant.
"When I came downstairs to smoke my pipe before the fire and have a mug of ale, every man in the common room stares at me as if I were his least favorite brother-in-law seeking to borrow money. One old grandfather starts ranting at me about the kind of stories I should or should not tell. Then a girl child shouts at me to get out, and threatens me with a great club when I don't move quickly enough for her. Who ever heard of treating a Gleeman so?"
Egwene's face was a study, her goggle-eyed amaze at a Gleeman in the flesh, marred by a desire to defend Nynaeve. "Your pardon, Master Gleeman," Rand said. He knew he was grinning foolishly himself. "That was our wisdom, and—"
"That pretty little slip of a girl,"
the Gleeman exclaimed.
"A village wisdom. Why, at her age, she should be better flirting with the young men than foretelling the weather and curing the sick."
Rand shifted uncomfortably. He hoped Nynaeve never overheard the man's opinion. At least, not until he had done with his performing. Perrin winced at the Gleeman's words, and Mat whistled soundlessly, as if both had had the same thought as he had. "The men with the village council," Rand went on. "I'm sure they intended no discourtesy. You see, we just learned there's a war in Ghealdan, and a man claiming to be the Dragon Reborn. A false dragon. Aes Sedai are riding there from Tar Valon. The council is trying to decide if we might be in danger here."
"Old news. Even in Baerlon," the Gleeman said dismissively. "And that is the last place in the world to hear anything."
He paused, looking around the village, and dryly added,
"Almost the last place."
Then his eyes fell on the wagon in front of the inn, standing alone now, with its shafts on the ground.
"So, I thought I recognized Padan Fain in there."
His voice was still deep, but the resonance had gone, replaced by scorn.
"Fain was always one to carry bad news quickly, and the worse, the faster. There's more raven in him than man."
"Master Fain has come often to Emond's Field, Master Gleeman," Egwene said, a hint of disapproval finally breaking through her delight. "He is always full of laughter, and he brings much more good news than bad." The Gleeman eyed her for a moment, then smiled broadly.
"Now you're a lovely lass. You should have rosebuds in your hair. Unfortunately, I cannot pull roses from the air, not this year. But how would you like to stand beside me tomorrow for a part of my performance?" hand me my flute when I want it, and certain other apparatus. I always choose the prettiest girl I can find as my assistant.
Perrin snickered, and Matt, who had been snickering, laughed out loud. Rand blinked in surprise. Egwene was glaring at him, and he had not even smiled. She straightened around and spoke in a too calm voice. "Thank you, Master Gleeman. I would be happy to assist you."
Tom Merrilin,
the Gleeman said. They stared.
My name is Tom Merrilin, not Master Gleeman.
He hitched the multi-hued cloak up on his shoulders, and abruptly his voice once more seemed to reverberate in a great hall.
Once a court bard, I am now indeed risen to the exalted rank of Master Gleeman, yet my name is plain Tom Merrilin, and Gleeman is the simple title in which I glory.
And he swept a bow so elaborate with flourishes of his cloak that Matt clapped and Egwene murmured appreciatively. Master Merrilin, Matt said, unsure exactly what form of address to take out of what Tom Merrilin had said. What is happening, Gildan? Do you know anything about this false dragon, or the Aes Sedai?
Do I look like a peddler, boy?
The Gleeman grumbled, tapping out his pipe on the heel of his palm. He made the pipe disappear somewhere inside his cloak, or his coat. Rand was not sure where it had gone or how.
I'm a Gleeman, not a newsmonger. And I make a point of never knowing anything about Aes Sedai. Much safer that way.
But the war, Matt began eagerly, only to be cut off by Master Merrilin.
In wars, boy, fools kill other fools for foolish causes. That's enough for anyone to know. I am here for my art.
Suddenly he thrust a finger at Rand.
You lad, you're a tall one. Not with your full growth on you yet, but I doubt there's another man in the district with your height. Not many in the village with eyes that color either, I'll wager. The point is, you're an axe handle across the shoulders and as tall as an Aiel man. What's your name, lad?
Rand gave it hesitantly, not sure whether or not the man was making fun of him. But the Gleeman had already turned his attention to Perrin.
And you have almost the size of an ogier. Close enough. How are you called?
Not unless I stand on my own shoulders, Perrin laughed. I'm afraid Rand and I are just ordinary folk, Master Merrilin. Not made-up creatures from your stories. I'm Perrin Aybara. Tom Merrilin tugged at one of his mustaches.
Well now, made-up creatures from my stories. Is that what they are? You lads are widely traveled then, it seems.
Rand kept his mouth shut, certain they were the butt of a joke now, but Perrin spoke up. We've all been as far as Watch Hill and Devon Ride. Not many around here have gone as far. He was not boasting. Perrin seldom did. He was just telling the truth. We've all seen the mire, too, Matt added, and he did sound boastful. That's the swamp at the far end of the Waterwood. Nobody at all goes there. It's full of quicksands and bogs, except us. And nobody goes to the Mountains of Mist either, but we did once, to the foot of them anyway.
As far as that,
the Gleeman murmured, brushing at his mustaches now continually. Rand thought he was hiding a smile, and he saw that Perrin was frowning. It's bad luck to enter the mountains, Matt said, as if he had to defend himself for not going further. Everybody knows that. That's just foolishness, Matrim Cawthon, Egwene cut in angrily. Nynaeve says... She broke off, her cheeks turning pink, and the look she gave to Tom Merrilin was not as friendly as it had been. It is not right to make... It isn't... Her face went redder, and she fell silent. Matt blinked, as if he was just getting a suspicion of what had been going on.
You're right, child, the Gleeman said contritely. I apologize humbly. I am here to entertain. My tongue has always gotten me into trouble.
Maybe we haven't traveled as far as you, Perrin said flatly. But what does how tall Rand is have to do with anything?
Just this, lad. A little later I will let you try to pick me up, but you won't be able to lift my feet from the ground. Not you, nor your tall friend there, Rand, is it? Nor any other man. Now what do you think of that?
Perrin started to laugh. I can lift you right now. But when he stepped forward, Tom Merrilin motioned him back.
Later, lad, later. When there are more folk to watch. An artist needs an audience.
A score of folk had gathered on the green since the gleeman appeared from the inn, young men and women down to children who peeked wide-eyed and silent from behind the older onlookers. All looked as if they were waiting for miraculous things from the gleeman. The white-haired man looked them over. He appeared to be counting them, then gave a slight shake of his head and sighed.
I suppose I'd better give you a small sample, so you can run and tell the others, eh? Just a taste of what you'll see tomorrow at the festival.
He stepped back and suddenly leaped into the air, somersaulting to land facing them atop the old stone foundation. More than that, 3 balls, red, white, and black, began dancing between his hands even as he landed. A soft sound came from the watchers, half astonishment, half satisfaction. Even Rand forgot his irritation. He flashed Egwene a grin and got a delighted one in return. Then both turned to stare unabashedly at the gleeman.
You want stories?
Tom Merlin declaimed.
I have stories and I'll give them to you. I'll make them come alive before your eyes.
A blue ball joined the others from somewhere, then a green one and a yellow.
Tales of great wars and great heroes for the men and boys. For the women and girls, the entire Heptarigine cycle. Tales of Arthur Pendrag, Tonriol, Arthur Hawkwing, Arthur the High King, who once ruled all the lands from the Aiel Waste to the Areth Ocean, and even beyond. Wondrous stories of strange people and strange lands, of the Green Man, of warders and trollocs, of Ogier and Aiel, the 1,000 tales of Anla, the wise counselor, Jaime, the giant slayer, how Susa tamed Jain Farstrider, Mara, and the 3 foolish kings. Tell us about Len, Egwene called. How he flew to the moon in the belly of an eagle made of fire. Tell about his daughter, Salia, walking among the stars. Rand looked at her out of the corner of his eye, but she seemed intent on the gleeman. She had never liked stories about adventures and long journeys. Her favorites were always the funny ones, or stories about women outwitting people who were supposed to be smarter than everyone else. He was sure she had asked for tales about Len and Salia to put a burr under his shirt. Surely she could see the world outside was no place for Two Rivers folk. Listening to tales of adventures, even dreaming about them was one thing. Having them take place around you would be something else again. Old stories, those,
Tom Merlin said, and abruptly he was juggling 3 colored balls with each hand.
Stories from the age before the Age of Legends, some say. Perhaps even older. But I have old stories, mind you now, of ages that were and will be. Ages when men ruled the heavens and the stars, and ages when man roamed as brother to the animals. Ages of wonder and ages of horror. Ages ended by fire raining from the skies, and ages doomed by snow and ice covering land and sea. I have old stories, and I will tell old stories. Tales of Mosk the Giant with his lance of fire that could reach around the world, and his wars with Alsbeth, the queen of all. Tales of Mataris, the healer, mother of the wondrous Ind.
The balls now danced between Tom's hands in 2 intertwining circles. His voice was almost a chant, and he turned slowly as he spoke, as if surveying the onlookers to gauge his effect.
I will tell you of the end of the Age of Legends, of the dragon, and his attempt to free the Dark One into the world of men. I will tell of the time of madness, when Aes Sedai shattered the world, of the Trolloc Wars, when men battled Trollocs for rule of the earth, of the War of the 100 Years, when men battled men, and the nations of our day were wrought. I will tell the adventures of men and women, rich and poor, great and small, proud and humble. The siege of the Pillars of the Sky. How Goodwife Carol cured her husband of snoring. How Dareth and the fall of the House of...
Abruptly, the flow of words and the juggling alike stopped. Tom simply snatched the balls from the air and stopped talking. Unnoticed by Rand, Moraine had joined the listeners. Lan was at her shoulder, though he had to look twice to see the man. For a moment, Tom looked at Moraine sideways, his face and body still except for making the balls disappear into his capacious coat sleeves. Then he bowed to her, holding his cloak wide.
Your pardon, but you are surely not from this district.
Lady, no one hissed fiercely. The Lady Moraine. Tom blinked, then bowed again, more deeply.
Your pardon again, lady. I meant no disrespect.
Moraine made a small waving away gesture.
None was perceived, Master Bard, and my name is simply Moraine. I am indeed a stranger here, a traveler like yourself, far from home and alone. The world can be a dangerous place when one is a stranger.
The Lady Moraine collects stories, Eowyn put in. Stories about things that happen in the Two Rivers. Though I don't know whatever happened here to make a story of.
I trust you will like my stories as well, Moraine.
Tom watched her with obvious wariness. He looked not best pleased to find her there. Suddenly Rand wondered what sort of entertainment a lady like her might be offered in a city like Baerlon or Caemlyn. Surely it could not be anything better than a gleeman.
That is a matter of taste, Master Bard, Moraine replied. Some stories I like, and some I do not.
Tom's bow was his deepest yet, bending his long body parallel to the ground.
I assure you, none of my stories will displease. All will please and entertain. And you do me too much honor. I am a simple gleeman. That, and nothing more.
Moraine answered his bow with a gracious nod. For an instant she seemed even more the Lady Eowyn had named her, accepting an offering from one of her subjects. Then she turned away, and Lan followed, a wolf heeling a gliding swan. Tom stared after them, bushy brows drawn down, stroking his long mustaches with a knuckle, until they were halfway up the green.
He's not pleased at all, Rand thought.
Are you going to juggle some more now? Eowyn demanded. Eat fire, Matt shouted. I want to see you eat fire. The harp, a voice cried from the crowd. Play the harp. Someone else called for the flute. At that moment, the door of the inn opened, and the village council trundled out, Nynaeve in their midst. Adan Fane was not with them, Rand saw. Apparently the peddler had decided to remain in the warm common room with his mulled wine. Muttering about strong brandy, Tom Merrilin abruptly jumped down from the old foundation. He ignored the cries of those who had been watching him, pressing inside past the councilors before they were well out of the doorway. Is he supposed to be a gleeman or a king? Sen Bowie asked in annoyed tones. A waste of good money, if you ask me. Bran al'Vir half turned after the gleeman, then shook his head. That man may be more trouble than he's worth. Nynaeve, busy gathering her cloak around her, sniffed loudly. Worry about the gleeman if you want, Brandolwyn al'Vir. At least he is in Emond's Field, which is more than you can say for this false dragon. But as long as you are worrying, there are others here who should excite your worry. If you please, Wisdom, Bran said stiffly, kindly leave who should worry me to my deciding. Mistress Moraine and Master Lan are guests in my inn, and decent, respectable folk, so I say. Neither of them has called me a fool in front of the whole council. Neither of them has told the council it hasn't a full set of wits among them. It seems my estimate was too high by half, Nynaeve retorted. She strode away without a backward glance, leaving Bran's jaw working as he searched for a reply. Egwene looked at Rand as if she were going to speak, then darted after the Wisdom instead. Rand knew there must be some way to stop her from leaving the Two Rivers, but the only way he could think of was not one he was prepared to take, even if she was willing. And she had as much said she was not willing at all, which made him feel even worse. That young woman wants a husband, Sen Bowie growled, bouncing on his toes. His face was purple and getting darker. She lacks proper respect. We're the village council, not boys raking her yard, and... The mayor breathed heavily through his nose and suddenly rounded on the old Thatcher. Be quiet, Sen. Stop acting like a black-veiled Aiel. The skinny man froze in his toes in astonishment. The mayor never let his temper get the best of him. Bran glared. Burn me, but we have better things to be about than this foolishness. Or do you intend to prove Nynaeve right? With that, he stumped back into the inn and slammed the door behind him. The council members glanced at Sen, then moved off in their separate directions. All but Harald Luhan, who accompanied the stony-visaged Thatcher, talking quietly. The blacksmith was the only one who could ever get Sen to see reason. Rand went to meet his father, and his friends trailed after him. I've never seen Master al'Vir so mad, was the first thing Rand said, getting him a disgusted look from Matt. The mayor and the Wisdom seldom agree, Tam said. And they agree less than usual today. That's all. It's the same in every village. What about the false dragon? Matt asked, and Perrin added eager murmurs. What about the Aes Sedai? Tam shook his head slowly. Master Fane knew little more than he had already told, at least little of interest to us. Battles won or lost, cities taken and retaken. All in Gil'Adan, thank the light. It hasn't spread, or had not the last Master Fane knew. Battles interest me, Matt said, and Perrin added, what did he say about them? Battles don't interest me, Matrim, Tam said. But I'm sure he will be glad to tell you all about them later. What does interest me is that we shouldn't have to worry about them here, as far as the Council can tell. We can see no reason for Aes Sedai to come here on their way south. And as for the return journey, they aren't likely to want to cross the Forest of Shadows and swim the White River. Rand and the others chuckled at the idea. There were 3 reasons why no one came into the 2 rivers except from the north, by the way of Taran Ferry. The Mountains of Mist in the west were the first, of course, and the mire blocked the east just as effectively. To the south was the White River, which got its name from the way rocks and boulders churned its swift waters to froth. And beyond the White lay the Forest of Shadows. Few 2 Rivers folk had ever crossed the White, and fewer still returned if they did. It was generally agreed, though, that the Forest of Shadows stretched south for 100 miles or more, without a road or a village, but with plenty of wolves and bears. So that's an end to it for us, Matt said. He sounded at least a little disappointed. Not quite, Tam said. Day after tomorrow we will send men to Devon Ride and Watch Hill and Taran Ferry too, to arrange for a watch to be kept. Riders along the White and the Taran both, and patrols between. It should be done today, but only the mayor agrees with me. The rest can't see asking anyone to spend Beltane off riding across the 2 rivers. But I thought you said we didn't have to worry, Perrin said, and Tam shook his head. I said should not, boy, not did not. I've seen men die because they were sure that what should not happen would not. Besides, the fighting will stir up all sorts of people. Most will just be trying to find safety, but others will be looking for a way to profit from the confusion. We'll offer any of the first a helping hand, but we must be ready to send the second type on their way. Abruptly, Matt spoke up. Can we be part of it? I want to anyway. You know I can ride as well as anyone in the village. You want a few weeks of cold, boredom, and sleeping rough? Tam chuckled. Likely that's all there will be to it. I hope that's all. Well, we're out of the way even for refugees. But you can speak to Master Alvear if your mind is made up. Rand, it's time for us to be getting back to the farm. Rand blinked in surprise. I thought we were staying for winter night. Things need seeing to at the farm, and I need you with me. Even so, we don't have to leave for hours yet. And I want to volunteer for the patrols too. We are going now, his father replied in a tone that brooked no argument. In a softer voice he added, we'll be back tomorrow and plenty of time for you to speak to the mayor. And plenty of time for festival too. 5 minutes now, then meet me in the stable. Are you going to join Rand and me on the watch? Matt asked Perrin as Tam left. I'll bet there's nothing like this ever happened in the 2 Rivers before. Why, if we get up to the Tarn, we might even see soldiers, or who knows what. Even Tinkers. I expect I will, Perrin said slowly, if Master Luhan doesn't need me, that is. The war is in Gil'Adan, Rand snapped. With an effort, he lowered his voice. The war is in Gil'Adan, and the Aes Sedai are the light knows where, but none of it is here. The man in the black cloak is, or have you forgotten him already? The others exchanged embarrassed looks. Sorry, Rand, Matt muttered, but a chance to do something besides milk my Da's cows doesn't come along very often. He straightened under their startled stares. Well, I do milk them, and every day, too. The Black Rider, Rand reminded them. What if he hurts somebody? Maybe he's a refugee from the war, Perrin said doubtfully. Whatever he is, Matt said, the watch will find him. Maybe.
Hey,
Rand
Grandpa,
said,
how you
but he seems to
doing?
disappear when he wants to. It might
Hope
be
you're
better
doing
if they
good.
leave to look for him. We'll tell Master Alvear when we volunteer for the patrols, Matt said. And he'll tell the council, and they'll tell the watch. The council? Baron said incredulously. We'd be lucky if the man didn't laugh out loud. Master Luhan and Rand's father already think the two of us are jumping at shadows. Rand sighed.
Nice. Days gone. Hell yeah.
He won't laugh any louder today than he will tomorrow.
Hope you have a good stream, Grandpa.
Maybe. Baron
I have to go by there and drop you a thumbs up and a like.
We'll see just about everybody in the village tonight. Matt's scowl deepened, but he still did not say anything. All of them understood that Perrin meant they should find witnesses who were more reliable than Matt. He won't laugh any louder tomorrow, Perrin added when Rand hesitated. And I'd just as soon have somebody else with us when we go to him. Half the village would suit me fine. Rand nodded slowly. He could already hear Master Alvear laughing. More witnesses certainly could not hurt. And if 3 of them had seen the fellow, others had to have too. They must have. Tomorrow, then. You two find whoever you can tonight, and tomorrow we go to the mayor. After that... They looked at him silently, no one raising the question of what happened if they could not find anyone else who had seen the black-cloaked man. The question was clear in their eyes, though, and he had no answer. He sighed heavily. I'd better go now. My father will be wondering if I fell into a hole. Followed by their goodbyes, he trotted around.
Oh, me too. Because I could wear these for a little bit, but they just give me a insane headaches when I do. Yeah, much love to you too, brother.
Covered with straw filled both sides of the dim interior.
That's the only bad part about only wearing once in a while, like for a little bit at a time.
Their oats in the 8 stalls. And Master Alvear's massive Durans, the team he hired out when farmers had hauling beyond the abilities of their own horses, filled 6 more. But only 3 others were occupied, and thought he could match up horse and rider with no trouble. The tall, deep-chested black stallion that swung up his head fiercely had to be Lan's. The sleek white mare with an arched neck, her quick steps as graceful as a girl dancing, even in the stall, could only belong to Moraine. And the third unfamiliar horse, a rangy, slab-sided gelding of a dusty brown, fit Tom Maryland perfectly. Tam stood in the rear of the stable, holding Bella by a lead rope and speaking quietly to Hugh and Tad. Before Rand had taken 2 steps into the stable, his father nodded to the stableman and brought them out, wordlessly gathering up Rand as he went. They harnessed the shaggy mare. Tam appeared so deep in thought that Rand held his tongue. He did not look forward to trying to convince his father about the black-cloaked rider, much less the mayor. Tomorrow would have to be time enough, when Matt and the rest had found others who had seen the man. If they found others. As the cart lurched into motion, Rand took his bow and quiver from the back, awkwardly belting the quiver at his waist as he half-trotted alongside. When they reached the last row of houses in the village, he knocked an arrow, carrying it half-raised and partly drawn. Except mostly, but his shoulders tightened. The Black Rider could be on them before either of them knew it. There might not be time to draw the bow if he was not already halfway to it. He knew he could not keep up the tension on the bowstring for long. He had made the bow himself, and Tam was one of the few others in the district who could draw all the way to the cheek. He cast around for something to take his mind off thinking about the Dark Rider. Surrounded by the forest, their cloaks flapping in the wind, it was not easy. Father, he said finally, I don't understand why the council had to question Padan Fain. With an effort, he took his eyes off the woods and looked across Bella at Tam. It seems to me the decision you reached could have been made right on the spot. The mayor frightened everybody half out of their wits, talking about Aes Sedai and the false dragon here in the 2 rivers. People are funny, Rand. The best of them are. Take Harald Luhan. Master Luhan is a strong man and a brave one, but he can't bear to see butchering done. Turns pale as a sheet. What does that have to do with anything? Everybody knows Master Luhan can't stand the sight of blood, and nobody but the Coplans and the Congers thinks anything of it. Just this, lad. People don't always think or behave the way you might believe they would. Those folk back there, Let the hail beat their crops into the mud and the wind take off every roof in the district, and the wolves kill half their livestock. They'll roll up their sleeves and start from scratch. They'll grumble, but they won't waste any time with it. But you give them just the thought of Aes Sedai and a false dragon in Gillidan. And soon enough, they'll start thinking that Gillidan is not that far the other side of the Forest of Shadows. And a straight line from Tar Valon to Gillidan wouldn't pass that much to the east of us. As if the Aes Sedai wouldn't take the road through Caemlyn and Lugard instead of traveling cross-country. By tomorrow morning, half the village would have been sure the entire war was about to descend on us. It would take weeks to undo. A fine Beltane that would make. So Bran gave them the idea before they could get it for themselves. They've seen the council take the problem under consideration. By now, they'll be hearing what we decided. They chose us for the village council because they trust we can reason things out in the best way for everybody. They trust our opinions. Even Sen's, which doesn't say much for the rest of us, I suppose. At any rate, they will hear there isn't anything to worry about, and they'll believe it. It is not that they couldn't reach the same conclusion, or would not eventually. But this way, we won't have Festival ruined, and nobody has to spend weeks worrying about something that isn't likely to happen. If it does, against all odds, well, the patrols will give us enough warning to do what we can. I truly don't think it will come to that, though. Bran puffed out his cheeks. Apparently, being on the council was far more complicated than he had believed. The cart rumbled on along the quarry road. Did anyone besides Baron see this strange rider? Sam asked. That did, but... Bran blinked, then stared across Bella's back at his father. You believe me? I have to go back. I have to tell them. Sam's shout halted him as he turned to run back to the village. Hold, lad, hold. You think I waited this long to speak for no reason? Reluctantly, Rand kept on beside the cart, still creaking along behind patient Bella. What made you change your mind? Why can't I tell the others? They'll know soon enough. At least Perrin will. Matt, I'm not sure of. Word must be gotten to the farms as best it can. But in another hour, there won't be anyone in Emmonsfield above 16. Those who can be responsible about it, at least. Who doesn't know a stranger is skulking around, and likely not the sort you would invite to Festival. The winter has been bad enough without this to scare the young ones. Festival, Rand said. If you had seen him, you wouldn't want him closer than 10 miles. 100, maybe. Perhaps so, Sam said placidly. He could be just a refugee from the troubles in Gillidan. More likely a thief who thinks the pickings will be easier here than in Baerlon or Tarren Ferry. Even so, no one around here has so much they can afford to have it stolen. If the man is trying to escape the war, well, that's still no excuse for scaring people. Once the watch is mounted, it should either find him or frighten him off. I hope it frightens him off. Why do you believe me now, when you didn't this morning? I had to believe my own eyes then, lad. And I saw nothing. Sam shook his grizzled head. Only young men see this fellow, it seems. When Harald Luhan mentioned Perrin jumping shadows, though, it all came out. John Thane's oldest son saw him too, and so did Samuel Craw's boy, Bandry. Well, when 4 of you say you've seen a thing, and solid lads all, we start thinking maybe it's there, whether we can see it or not. All except Sen, of course. Anyway, that's why we're going home. With both of us away, this stranger could be up to any kind of mischief there. If not for Festival, I wouldn't come back tomorrow either. But we can't make ourselves prisoners in our own homes just because this fellow is lurking about. I didn't know about Banner Lem, Rand said. The rest of us were going to the mayor tomorrow. But we were worried he wouldn't believe us either. Gray hairs don't mean our brains have curdled, Sam said dryly. So you keep a sharp eye. Maybe I'll catch sight of him too, if he shows up again. Rand settled down to do just that. He was surprised to realize that his step felt lighter. The knots were gone from his shoulders. He was still scared, but it was not so bad as it had been. Sam and he were just as alone on the quarry road as they had been that morning, but some way, he felt as if the entire village were with them. That others knew and believed made all the difference. There was nothing the black-cloaked horseman could do that the people of Emond's Field could not handle together. Chapter 5. Winter Night. The sun stood halfway down from its noonday high by the time the cart reached the farmhouse. It was not a big house, not nearly so large as some of the sprawling farmhouses to the east, dwellings that had grown over the years to hold entire families. In the Two Rivers, that often included 3 or 4 generations under one roof, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and nephews. Tam and Rand were considered out of the ordinary as much for being 2 men living alone as for farming in the Westwood. Here, most of the rooms were on one floor, a neat rectangle with no wings or additions. 2 bedrooms and an attic storeroom fitted up under the steeply sloped front. If the whitewash was only covered from the stout wooden walls after the winter storm, the house was still in a tight state, the thatch tightly mended, the shutters well hung, and snug. House and stone sheep pen formed the points of a triangle around the farmyard, where a few chickens had ventured out to scratch at the cold ground. An open shearing shed and a stone dipping trough stood next to the sheep pen. Hard by the fields, between the farmyard and the trees, loomed the tall cone of a tight-walled curing shed. Few farmers in the Two Rivers could make do without both wool and tobacco to sell when the merchants came. When Rand took a look in the stone pen, the heavy-horned herd ram looked back at him, but most of the black-faced flock remained placidly where they lay, or stood, with their heads in the feed barn. Their crops were curly, but it was still too cold for shearing. The black-cloaked man came here, Rand called to his father, who was walking slowly around the farmhouse, spear held at the ready, examining the ground intently. The sheep wouldn't be so settled if that one had been around. Tam nodded, but did not stop. When he had made a complete circuit of the house, he did the same around the barn and the sheep pen, still studying the ground. He even checked the smokehouse and the curing shed. Drawing a bucket of water from the well, he sniffed the water and gingerly touched it with the tip of his tongue. Abruptly, he barked a laugh, then drank it down in a quick gulp. I suppose he didn't, he told Rand, wiping his hand on his coat front. All this about men and horses I can't see or hear just makes me look crossways at everything. He emptied the well water into another bucket and started for the house, the bucket in one hand and his spear in the other. I'll start some stew for supper. And as long as we're here, we might as well get caught up on a few chores. Rand grimaced, regretting winter night in Emond's Field. But Tam was right. Around a farm, the work never really got done. As soon as one thing was finished, 2 more always needed doing. He hesitated about it, but kept his bow and quiver close at hand. If the Dark Rider did appear, he had no intention of facing him with nothing but a hoe. First was stabling Bella. Once he had unharnessed her and put her into a stall in the barn next to their cow, he set his cloak aside and rubbed the mare down with handfuls of dry straw, then curried her with a pair of brushes. Climbing the narrow ladder to the loft, he pitched down hay for her feed. He fetched a scoopful of oats for her as well, though there was little enough left, and might be no more for a long while, unless the weather warmed soon. The cow had been milked that morning before first light, giving a quarter of her usual yield. She seemed to be drying up as the winter hung on. Enough feed had been left to see the sheep for 2 days. They should have been in the pasture by now, but there was none worth calling it so. Buddy topped off their water. Whatever eggs had been laid needed to be gathered too. There were only 3. The hens seemed to be getting cleverer at hiding them. He was taking a hoe to the vegetable garden behind the house when Tam came out and settled on a bench in front of the barn to mend harness, propping his spear beside him. It made Rand feel better about the bow lying on his cloak a pace from where he stood. Few weeds had pushed above ground, but more weeds than anything else. The cabbages were stunted, barely a sprout of the beans or peas showed, and there was not a sign of a beet. Not everything had been planted, of course, only part, in hopes the cold might break in time to make a crop of some kind before the cellar was empty. It did not take long to finish hoeing, which would have suited him just fine in years past, but now he wondered what they would do if nothing came up this year. Not a pleasant thought. And there was still firewood to split. It seemed to Rand like years since there had not been firewood to split. But complaining would not keep the house warm, so he fetched the axe, propped up bow and quiver, the block, and got to work. Pine for a quick hot flame, and oak for long burning. Before long, he was warm enough to put his coat aside. When the pile of split wood grew big enough, he stacked it against the side of the house, beside other stacks already there. Most reached all the way to the eaves. Usually by this time of year, the wood piles were small and few, but not this year. Chop and stack, chop and stack. He lost himself in the rhythm of the axe and the motions of stacking wood. Tam's hand on his shoulder brought him back to where he was, and for a moment he blinked in surprise. Great twilight had come on while he worked, and already it was fading quickly toward night. The full moon stood well above the treetops, shimmering pale and bulging as if about to fall on their heads. The wind had grown colder without his noticing, too, and tattered clouds scuttered across the darkling sky. "Let's wash up, lad, and see about some supper. I've already carried in water for hot baths before sleep." "Anything hot sounds good to me," Rand said, snatching up his cloak and tossing it round his shoulders. Sweat soaked his shirt, and the wind, forgotten in the heat of swinging the axe, seemed to be trying to freeze it, now that he had stopped work. He stifled a yawn, shivering as he gathered the rest of his things. "And sleep, too, for that. I might just sleep right through festival." "Would you care to make a small wager about that?" Tam smiled, and Rand had to grin back. He would not miss Beltane if he had had no sleep in a week. No one would. Tam had been extravagant with the candles, and a fire crackled in the big stone fireplace, so that the main room had a warm, cheerful feel to it. A broad oaken table was the main feature of the room, other than the fireplace, a table long enough to seat a dozen or more, though there had seldom been so many around it since Rand's mother died. A few cabinets and chests, most of them skillfully made by Tam himself, lined the walls, and high-backed chairs stood around the table. The cushioned chair that Tam called his reading chair sat angled before the flames. Rand preferred to do his reading stretched out on the rug in front of the fire. The shelf of books by the door was not nearly as long as the one at the Wine Spring Inn, but books were hard to come by. Few peddlers carried more than a handful, and those had to be stretched out among everyone who wanted them. If the room did not look quite so freshly scrubbed as most farm wives kept their homes, Tam's pipe rack and the travels of giant Farstrider sat on the table, while another wood-bound book rested on the cushion of his reading chair. A bit of harness to be mended lay on the bench by the fireplace, and some shirts to be darned made a heap on a chair. If not quite so spotless, it was still clean and neat enough, with a lived-in look that was almost as warming and comforting as the fire. Here, it was possible to forget the chill beyond the walls. There was no false dragon here, no wars, no Aes Sedai. No men in black cloaks. The aroma from the stew pot hanging over the fire permeated the room and filled Rand with ravenous hunger. His father stirred the stew pot with a long-handled wooden spoon, then took a taste. A little while longer. Rand hurried to wash his face and hands. There was a pitcher and basin on the washstand by the door. A hot bath was what he wanted to take away the sweat and soak the chill out, but that would come when there had been time to heat the big kettle in the back room. Tam rooted around in a cabinet and came up with a key as long as his hand. He twisted it in the big iron lock on the door. At Rand's questioning look, he said, "Best to be safe. Maybe I'm taking a fancy, or maybe the weather is blacking my mood. But," he sighed and bounced the key on his palm. "I'll see to the back door," he said, and disappeared toward the back of the house. Rand could not remember either door ever being locked. No one in the Two Rivers locked doors. There was no need. Until now, at least. From overhead, from Tam's bedroom, came a scraping as of something being dragged across the floor. Rand frowned. Unless Tam had suddenly decided to move the furniture around, he could only be pulling out the old chest he kept under his bed. Another thing that had never been done in Rand's memory. He filled a small kettle with water for tea and hung it from a hook over the fire, then set the table. He had carved the bowls and spoons himself. The front shutters had not yet been closed, and from time to time he peered out. But full night had come, and all he could see were moon shadows. The dark rider Spider could be out there easily enough, but he tried not to think about that. When Tam came back, Rand stared in surprise. A thick belt slanted around Tam's waist, and from the belt hung a sword with a bronze heron on the black scabbard and another on the long hilt. The only men Rand had ever seen wearing swords were the merchant's guards. And Lan, of course. That his father might own one had never even occurred to him. Except for the herons, the sword looked a good deal like Lan's sword. "Where did that come from?" he asked. "Did you get it from a peddler? How much did it cost?" Slowly, Tam drew the weapon. Firelight played along the gleaming length. It was nothing at all like the plain, rough blades Rand had seen in the hands of merchants' guards. No gems or gold adorned it, but it seemed grand to him nonetheless. The blade, very slightly curved and sharp on only one edge, bore another heron etched into the steel. Short quillons, worked to look like braid, flanked the hilt. It seemed almost fragile compared with the swords of the merchant's guards. Most of those were double-edged and thick enough to chop down a tree. "I got it a long time ago," Tam said. "A long way from here. I paid entirely too much. 2 coppers is too much for one of these. Your mother didn't approve, but she was always wiser than I. I was younger then, and it seemed worth the price at the time. She always wanted me to get rid of it, and more than once I thought she was right, that I should just give it away." Reflected fire made the blade seem aflame. Rand started. He had often daydreamed about owning a sword. "Give it away? How could you give a sword like that away?" Tam snorted. "Not much use in herding sheep now, is it? Can't plow a field or harvest a crop with it." For a long minute, he stared at the sword as if wondering what he was doing with such a thing. At last, he let out a heavy sigh. "But if I am not just taken by a black fancy, if our luck runs sour, maybe in the next few days we'll be glad I tucked it in that old chest instead." He slid the sword smoothly back into its sheath and wiped his hand on his shirt with a grimace. "The stew should be ready. I'll dish it out while you fix the tea." Rand nodded and got the tea canister. But he wanted to know everything. Why would Tam have bought a sword? He could not imagine. And where had Tam come by it? How far away? No one ever left the 2 rivers, or very few at least. He had always vaguely supposed his father must have gone outside. His mother had been an outlander. But a sword? He had a lot of questions to ask once they had settled at the table. The tea water was boiling fiercely, and he had to wrap a cloth around the kettle's handle to lift it off the hook. Heat soaked through immediately. As he straightened from the fire, a heavy thump at the door rattled the lock. All thoughts of the sword, or the hot kettle in his hand, flew away. "One of the neighbors," he said uncertainly. "Master Daughtry wanting to borrow." But the Daughtry farm, their nearest neighbor, was an hour away, even in the daylight. And Oren Daughtry, shameless borrower that he was still not likely to leave his house by dark. Tam softly placed the stew-filled bowls on the table. Slowly, he moved away from the table. Both of his hands rested on his sword hilt. "I don't think," he began. The door burst open, pieces of the iron lock spinning across the floor. A figure filled the doorway, bigger than any man Rand had ever seen. A figure in black mail that hung to his knees, with spikes at wrists and elbows and shoulders. One hand clutched a heavy, scythe-like sword. The other hand was flung up before his eyes as if to shield them from the light. Rand felt the beginnings of an odd sort of relief. Whoever this was, it was not the black-cloaked rider. Then he saw the curled ram's horns on the head that brushed the top of the doorway, and where the mouth and nose should have been was a hairy muzzle. He took in all of it in the space of one deep breath that he let out in a terrified yell, as, without thinking, he hurled the hot kettle at the half-human head. The creature roared, part scream of pain, part animal snarl, as boiling water splashed over its face. Even as the kettle struck, Tam's sword flashed. The roar abruptly became a gurgle, and the huge shape toppled back. Before it finished falling, another was trying to claw its way past. Rand glimpsed a misshapen head topped by spike-like horns before Tam struck again, and 2 huge bodies blocked the door. He realized his father was shouting at him. "Run, lad! Hide in the woods!" The bodies in the doorway jerked as others outside tried to pull them clear. Tam thrust a shoulder under the massive table. With a grunt, he heaved it over atop the tangle. "There are too many to hold. Out the back. Go, go, I'll follow." Even as Rand turned away, shame filled him that he obeyed so quickly. He wanted to stay and help his father, though he could not imagine how. But fear had him by the throat, and his legs moved on their own. He dashed from the room toward the back of the house, as fast as he had ever run in his life. Crashes and shouts from the front door pursued him. He had his hands on the bar across the back door when his eye fell on the iron lock that was never locked. Except that Tam had done just that tonight. Letting the bar stay where it was, he darted to a side window, flung up the sash, and threw back the shutters. Night had replaced twilight completely. The full moon and drifting clouds made dappled shadows chase one another across the farmyard. Shadows, he told himself. Only shadows. The back door creaked as someone outside, or something, tried to push it open. His mouth went dry. A crash shook the door in its frame and lent him speed. He slipped through the window like a hare going to ground and cowered against the side of the house. Inside the room, wood splintered like thunder. He forced himself up to a crouch, made himself peer inside, just with one eye, just at the corner of the window. In the dark, he could not make out much, but more than he really wanted to see. The door hung askew, and shadowed shapes moved cautiously into the room, talking in low, guttural voices. Rand understood none of what was said. The language sounded harsh, unsuited to a human tongue. Axes and spears and spiked things dully reflected stray glimmers of moonlight. Boots scraped on the floor, and there was a rhythmic click, as of hooves as well. He tried to work moisture back into his mouth. Drawing a deep, ragged breath, he shouted as loudly as he could, "They're coming in the back!" The words came out in a croak, but at least they came out. He had not been sure they would. "I'm outside! Run, father!" With the last word, he was sprinting away from the farmhouse. Hoarse-voiced shouts in the strange tongue raged from the back room. Glass shattered, loud and sharp, and something thudded heavily to the ground behind him. He guessed one of them had broken through the window rather than try to squeeze through the opening. But he did not look back to see if he was right. Like a fox running from hounds, he darted into the nearest moon-cast shadows, as if headed for the woods, then dropped to his belly and slithered back to the barn and its larger, deeper shadows. Something fell across his shoulders, and he thrashed about, not sure if he was trying to fight or escape, until he realized he was grappling with the new hoe handle Tam had been shaping. Idiot. For a moment he lay there, trying to stop panting. Coupling fool, idiot. At last he crawled on along the back of the barn, dragging the hoe handle with him. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. Cautiously, he looked around the corner at the farmyard and the house. Of the creature that had jumped out after him, there was no sign. He could be anywhere. Hunting him, surely. Even creeping up on him at that very moment. Frightened bleats filled the sheep pen to his left. The flock milled as if trying to find an escape. Shattered shapes flickered in the lighted front windows of the house, and the clash of steel on steel rang through the darkness. Suddenly, one of the windows burst outward in a shower of glass and wood as Tam leaped through it, sword still in hand. He landed on his feet, but instead of running away from the house, he dashed toward the back of it, ignoring the monstrous things scrambling after him through the broken window in the doorway. Rand stared in disbelief. Why was he not trying to get away? Then he understood. Tam at last heard his voice from the rear of the house. "Father!" he shouted. "I'm over here!" In mid-stride, Tam whirled, not running toward Rand, but at an angle away from him. "Run, lad!" he shouted, gesturing with the sword as if to someone ahead of him. "Hide!" A dozen huge forms streamed after him, harsh shouts and shrill howls shivering the air. Rand pulled back into the shadows behind the barn. There he could not be seen from the house, in case any of the creatures were still inside. He was safe, for the moment at least. Not Tam. Tam was trying to lead those things away from him. His hands tightened on the hoe handle, and he had to clench his teeth to stop a sudden laugh. A hoe handle. Facing one of those creatures with a hoe handle would not be much like playing at quarterstaffs with Perrin. But he could not let Tam face what was chasing him alone. "If I move like I was stalking a rabbit," he whispered to himself, "they'll never hear me or see me." The eerie cries echoed in the darkness, and he tried to swallow. More like a pack of starving wolves. Soundlessly, he slipped away from the barn toward the forest, gripping the hoe handle so hard that his hands hurt. At first, when the trees surrounded him, he took comfort from them. They helped hide him from whatever the creatures were that had attacked the farm. As he crept through the woods, though, moon shadows shifted, and it began to seem as if the darkness of the forest changed and moved too. Trees loomed malevolently, branches writhed toward him. But were they just trees and branches? He could almost hear the growling chuckles stifled in their throats while they waited for him. The howls of Tam's pursuers no longer filled the night, but in the silence that replaced them, he flinched every time the wind scraped one limb against another. Lower and lower he crouched, and moved more and more slowly. He hardly dared to breathe for fear he might be heard. Suddenly a hand closed over his mouth from behind, and an iron grip seized his wrist. Frantically he clawed over his shoulder with his free hand for some hold on the attacker. "Don't break my neck, lad," came Tam's hoarse whisper. Relief flooded him, turning his muscles to water. When his father released him, he fell to his hands and knees, gasping as if he had run for miles. Tam dropped down beside him, leaning on one elbow. "I wouldn't have tried that if I had thought how much you've grown in the last few years," Tam said softly. His eyes shifted constantly as he spoke, keeping a sharp watch in the darkness. "But I had to make sure you didn't speak out. Some Trollocs can hear like a dog, maybe better. But Trollocs are just..." Rand let the words trail off. "Not just a story. Not after tonight. Those things could be Trollocs or the Dark One himself, for all he knew." "Are you sure?" he whispered. "I mean, Trollocs?" "I'm sure. Though what brought them to the Two Rivers? I never saw one before tonight, but I've talked with men who have, so I know a little. Maybe enough to keep us alive. Listen closely. A Trolloc can see better than a man in the dark, but bright lights blind them, for a time at least. That may be the only reason we got away from so many. Some can track by scent or sound, but they're said to be lazy. If we can keep out of their hands long enough, they should give up." That made Rand feel only a little better. "In the stories, they hate men and serve the Dark One. If anything belongs in the Shepherd of the Night's flocks, lad, it is Trollocs. They kill for the pleasure of killing, so I've been told. That's the end of my knowledge, except that they cannot be trusted unless they're afraid of you. And then not far." Rand shivered. He did not think he would want to meet anyone a Trolloc was afraid of. "You think they're still hunting for us?" "Maybe. Maybe not. They don't seem very smart. Once we got into the forest, I sent the ones after me off toward the mountains without much trouble." Tam fumbled at his right side, then put his hand close to his face. "Best act as if they are, though. You're hurt. Keep your voice down. It's just a scratch. And there is nothing to be done about it now, anyway. At least the weather seems to be warming." He lay back with a heavy sigh. Perhaps it won't be too bad spending the night out. In the back of his mind, Rand had just been thinking fond thoughts of his coat and cloak. The trees cut the worst of the wind, but what gusted through still sliced like a frozen knife. Hesitantly, he touched Tam's face and winced. "You're on fire. I have to get you to Nynaeve." "In a bit, lad. You don't have any time to waste. It's a long way in the dark." He scrambled to his feet and tried to pull his father up. A groan barely stifled by Tam's clenched teeth made Rand hastily ease him back down. "Let me rest a while, boy. I'm tired." Rand pounded his fist on his thigh. Snug in the farmhouse, with a fire and blankets, plenty of water and willow bark, he might have been willing to wait for daybreak before hitching Bella and taking Tam into the village. Here was no fire, no blankets, no bed, and no Bella.
Excuse me.
But those things were still back at the house.
Oh, that's what I was about to do.
If he could not carry Tam to them, perhaps he could bring some of them at least to Tam. If the Trollocs were gone, they had to go sooner or later. He looked at the hoe handle, then dropped it. Instead, he drew Tam's sword. The blade gleamed dully in the pale moonlight. The long hilt felt odd in his hand. The weight and heft were strange. He slashed at the air a few times before stopping with a sigh. Slashing at air was easy. If he had to do it against a Trolloc, he was surely just as likely to run instead, or freeze stiff, so he could not move at all until the Trollocs swung one of those odd swords and... Stop it. It's not helping anything. As he started to rise, Tam caught his arm. Where are you going? We need the cart, he said gently, and blankets. He was shocked at how easily he pulled his father's hand. Rest, and I'll be back. Tam. He could not see Tam's face in the moonlight. He kept his eyes on him. As careful as a mouse exploring a hawk's nest, he thought. As silently as another shadow, he slid into the darkness. He thought of all the times he had played tag in the woods with his friends as children, stalking one another, straining not to be heard until he put a hand on someone's shoulder. Somehow he could not make this seem the same. Creeping from tree to tree, he tried to make a plan, but by the time he reached the edge of the woods, he had made and discarded 10. Everything depended on whether or not the Trollocs were still there. If they were gone, he could simply walk up to the house and take what he needed. If they were still there, in that case, there was nothing for it but go back to Tam. He did not like it, but he could do Tam no good by getting killed. He peered toward the farm building. The barn and the sheep pen were only dark shapes in the moonlight. Light spilled from the front windows of the house, though, and through the open front door. Just the candles father lit. Or are there Trollocs waiting? He jumped convulsively at a nighthawk's reedy cry, then sagged against a tree, shaking. This was getting him nowhere. Dropping to his belly, he began to crawl, holding his sword awkwardly before him. He kept his chin in the dirt all the way to the back of the sheep pen. Crouched against the stone wall, he listened. Not a sound disturbed the night. Carefully, he eased up enough to look over the wall. Nothing moved in the farmyard. No shadows flickered against the lit windows of the house or in the doorway. Bella and the cart first, with the blankets and other things. It was the light that decided him. The barn was anything could be waiting inside, and he would have no way of knowing until it was too late. At least he would be able to see what was inside the house. As he started to lower himself again, he stopped suddenly. There was no sound. Most of the sheep might have settled down already and gone back to sleep, though it was not likely. But a few were always awake, even in the middle of the night, rustling about, bleating now and again. He could barely make out the shadowy mounds of sheep on the ground. One lay almost beneath him. Trying to make no noise, he hoisted himself onto the wall until he could stretch out a hand to the dim shape. His fingers touched curly wool, then wetness. The sheep did not move. Breath left him in a rush as he pushed back, almost dropping the sword as he fell to the ground outside the pen. They kill for fun. Shakily, he scrubbed the wetness from his hand in the dirt. Fiercely, he told himself that nothing had changed. The Trollocs had done their butchery and gone. Repeating that in his mind, he crawled on across the farmyard, keeping it as low as he could, but trying to watch every direction, too. He had never thought he would envy an earthworm. At the front of the house, he lay close beside the wall, beneath the broken window, and listened. Dull thudding of blood in his ears was the loudest sound he heard. Slowly, he reared up and peered inside. The stew pot lay upside down in the ashes in the hearth. Splintered, broken wood littered the room. Not a single piece of furniture remained whole. Even the table rested at an angle, two legs hacked to rough stubs. Every drawer had been pulled out and smashed. Every cupboard and cabinet stood open, many doors hanging by one hinge. Their contents were strewn over the wreckage, and everything was dusted with white. Flour and salt, to judge from the slashed sacks tossed down by the fireplace. 4 twisted bodies made a tangle in the remnants of the furnishings. Trollocs. Rand recognized one by its ram's horns. The others were much the same, even in their differences. A repulsive melange of human faces distorted by muzzles, horns, feathers, and fur. Their hands, almost human, only made it worse. 2 wore boots, the others had hooves. He watched without blinking until his eyes burned. None of the Trollocs moved. They had to be dead, and Tam was waiting. He ran in through the front door and stopped, gagging at the stench. A stable that had not been mucked out in months was the only thing he could think of that might come close to matching it. Vile smears defiled the walls. Trying to breathe through his mouth, he hurriedly began poking through the mess on the floor. There had been a water bag in one of the cupboards. A scraping sound behind him sent a chill to his marrow. and he spun, almost falling over the remains of the table. He caught himself and moaned behind teeth that would have chattered had he not had them clenched until his jaw ached. One of the Trollocs was getting to its feet. A wolf's muzzle jutted out between sunken eyes. Flat, emotionless eyes, and all too human. Hairy, pointed ears twitched incessantly. It stepped over one of its dead companions on sharp goat hooves. The same black mail the others wore rasped against leather trousers, and one of the huge, scythe-curved swords swung at its side. It muttered something, guttural and sharp, then said, "Others go away. Narg stay. Narg smart." The words were distorted and hard to understand, coming from a mouth never meant for human speech. Its tone was meant to be soothing, he thought, but he could not take his eyes off the stained teeth, long and sharp, that flashed every time the creature spoke. "Narg know some come back sometime. Narg wait. You no need sword. Put sword down." Until the Trolloc spoke, Rand did not realize that he held Tam's sword wavering before him in both hands, its point aimed at the huge creature. It towered head and shoulders above him with a chest and arms to dwarf Master Luhan. "Narg no hurt." It took a step closer, gesturing. "You put sword down." The dark hair in the backs of its hands was thick, like fur. "Stay back," Rand said, wishing his voice was steadier. "Why did you do this? Why?" "Belja de Garogda." The snarl quickly became a toothy smile. "Put sword down. Narg no hurt. Myrddraal want talk you." A flash of emotion crossed the distorted face. Fear. "Others come back. You talk, Myrddraal." It took another step, one big hand coming to rest on its own sword hilt. "You put sword down." Rand wet his lips. Myrddraal. The worst of the stories was walking tonight. If a Thade was coming, it made a Trolloc pale by comparison. He had to get away. But if the Trolloc drew that massive blade, he would not have a chance. He forced his lips into a shaky smile. "All right." Grip tightening on the sword, he let both hands drop to his sides. "I'll talk." The wolf's smile became a snarl, and the Trolloc lunged for him. Rand had not thought anything that big could move so fast. Desperately, he brought his sword up. The monstrous body crashed into him, slamming him against the wall. Breath left his lungs in one gasp. He fought for air as they fell to the floor together, the Trolloc on top. Frantically, he struggled beneath the crushing weight, trying to avoid thick hands groping for him and snapping jaws. Abruptly, the Trolloc spasmed and was still. Battered and bruised, half suffocated by the bulk on top of him, for a moment Rand could only lie there in disbelief. Quickly he came to his senses, though, enough to writhe out from under the body at least. And body it was. The bloodied blade of Tam's sword stood out from the center of the Trolloc's back. He had gotten it up in time after all. Blood covered Rand's hands as well, and made a blackish smear across the front of his shirt. His stomach churned, and he swallowed hard to keep from being sick. He shook as hard as he had in the worst of his fear, but this time in relief at still being alive. Others come back, the Trolloc had said. The other Trollocs would be returning to the farmhouse. And a Myrddraal, a Thade. The stories said Thades were 20 feet tall, with eyes of fire, and they rode shadows like horses. When a Thade turned sideways, it disappeared, and no wall could stop them. He had to do what he had come for and get away quickly. Grunting with the effort, he heaved the Trolloc's body over to get the sword, and almost ran when open eyes stared at him. It took him a minute to realize they were staring through the glaze of death. He wiped his hands on a tattered rag, it had been one of Tam's shirts only that morning, and tugged the blade free. Cleaning the sword, he reluctantly dropped the rag on the floor. There was no time for neatness, he thought, with a laugh that he had to clamp his teeth shut to stop. He did not see how they could ever clean the house well enough for it to be lived in again. The horrible stench had probably already soaked right into the timbers. But there was no time to think of that. No time for neatness, no time for anything, maybe. He was sure he was forgetting any number of things they would need, but Tam was waiting and the Trollocs were coming back. He gathered what he could think of on the run. blankets from the bedrooms upstairs, and clean clothes to bandage Tam's wound. Their cloaks and coats, a water bag that he carried when he took the sheep to pasture, a clean shirt. He did not know when he would have time to change, but he wanted to get out of his blood-smeared shirt at the first opportunity. The small bags of willow bark and their other medicines were part of a dark, muddy-looking pile he could not bring himself to touch. One bucket of the water Tam had brought in still stood by the fireplace, miraculously unspilled and untouched. He filled the water bag from it, gave his hands a hasty wash in the rest, and made one more quick search for anything he might have forgotten. He found his bow among the wreckage, broken cleanly in two at the thickest point. He shuddered as he let the pieces fall. What he had gathered already would have to do, he decided. Quickly, he piled everything outside the door. The last thing before leaving the house, he dug a shuttered lantern from the mess on the floor. It still held oil. Lighting it from one of the candles, he closed the shutters, partly against the wind, but mostly to keep from drawing attention, and hurried outside with the lantern in one hand and the sword in the other. He was not sure what he would find in the barn. The sheep pen kept him from hoping too much. But he needed the cart to get Tam to Emmons Field, and for the cart he needed Bella. Necessity made him hope a little. The barn doors stood open, one creaking on its hinges as it shifted in the wind. The interior looked as it always had, at first. Then his eyes fell on empty stalls, the stall doors ripped from their hinges. Bella and the cow were gone. Quickly he went to the back of the barn. The cart lay on its side, half the spokes broken out of its wheels. One shaft was only a foot-long stump. The despair he had been holding at bay filled him. He was not sure he could carry Tam as far as the village, even if his father could bear to be carried. The pain of it might kill Tam more quickly than the fever. Still, it was the only chance left. He had done all he could do here. As he turned to go, his eyes fell on the hacked-off cart shaft lying on the straw-strewn floor. Suddenly, he smiled. Hurriedly, he set the lantern and the sword on the straw-covered floor, and in the next instant, he was wrestling with the cart, tipping it back over to fall upright with a snap of more breaking spokes, then throwing his shoulder into it to heave it over on the other side. The undamaged shaft stood straight out. Snatching up the sword, he hacked at the well-seasoned ash. To his pleased surprise, great chips flew with his strokes, and he cut through as quickly as he could have with a good axe. When the shaft fell free, he looked at the sword blade in wonder. Even the best sharpened axe would have dulled chopping through that hard, aged wood, but the sword looked as brightly sharp as ever. He touched the edge with his thumb, then hastily stuck it in his mouth. The blade was still razor sharp. He had no time for wonder. Blowing out the lantern, there was no need to have the barn burned down on top of everything else. He gathered up the shafts and ran back to get what he had left at the house. Altogether, it made an awkward burden. Not a heavy one, but hard to balance and manage. The cart shafts shifting and twisting in his arms as he stumbled across the plowed field. Once back in the forest, they were even worse, catching on trees and knocking him half off his feet. They would have been easier to drag, but that would leave a clear trail behind him. He intended to wait as long as possible before doing that. Tam was right where he had left him, seemingly asleep. He hoped it was sleep. Suddenly fearful, he dropped his burdens and put a hand to his father's face. Tam still breathed, but the fever was worse. The touch roused Tam, but only into a hazy wakefulness. "Is that you, boy?" he breathed. "Worried about you. Dreams of days gone. Nightmares." Murmuring softly, he drifted off again. "Don't worry," Rand said. He laid Tam's coat and cloak over him to keep off the wind. "I'll get you to Nine Neave just as quickly as I can." As he went on, as much to reassure himself as for Tam's benefit, he peeled off his blood-stained shirt, hardly even noticing the cold in his haste to get rid of it, and hurriedly pulled on a clean one. Throwing his old shirt away made him feel as if he had just had a bath. "We'll be safe in the village in no time, and the wisdom will set everything right. You'll see. Everything's going to be all right." That thought was like a beacon as he pulled on his coat and bent to tend Tam's wound. They would be safe once they reached the village, and Nynaeve would cure Tam. He just had to get him there. Chapter 6. The Westwood. In the moonlight, Rand could not really see what he was doing, but Tam's wound seemed to be only a shallow gash along the ribs, no longer than the palm of his hand. He shook his head in disbelief. He had seen his father take more of an injury than that, and not even stop work except to wash it off. Hastily he searched Tam from head to foot for something bad enough to account for the fever, but the one cut was all he could find. Small as it was, that lone cut was still grave enough. The flesh around it burned to the touch. It was even hotter than the rest of Tam's body, and the rest of him was hot enough to make Rand's jaws clench. Scalding fever like that could kill or leave a man a husk of what he had once been. He soaked a cloth with water from the skin and laid it across Tam's forehead. He tried to be gentle about washing and bandaging the gash on his father's ribs, but soft groans still interrupted Tam's low muttering. Stark branches loomed around them, threatening as they shifted in the wind. Surely the Trollocs would go on their way when they failed to find Tam and him, when they came back to the farmhouse and found it still empty. He tried to make himself believe it, but the wanton destruction at the house, the senselessness of it, left little room for belief of that sort. Believing they would give up short of killing everyone and everything they could find was dangerous, a foolish chance he could not afford to take. Trollocs. Fucking light above. Trollocs. Creatures out of the Gleeman's Tale coming out of the night to bash in the door. And a fade. Light shine on me, a fade. Abruptly he realized he was holding the untied ends of the bandage in motionless hands. Frozen like a rabbit that's seen a hawk's shadow, he thought scornfully. With an angry shake of his head, he finished tying the bandage around Tam's chest. Knowing what he had to do, even getting on with it did not stop him being afraid. When the Trollocs came back, they would surely begin searching the forest around the farm for some trace of the people who had escaped them. The body of the one he had killed would tell them those people were not far off. Who knew what a fade would do, or could do? On top of that, his father's comment about Trollocs hearing was as loud in his mind as if Tam had just said it. He found himself resisting the urge to put a hand over Tam's mouth to still his groans and murmurs. Some track by scent. What can I do about that? Nothing. He could not waste time worrying over problems he could do nothing about. You have to keep quiet, he whispered in his father's ear. The Trollocs will be back. Tam spoke in hushed, hoarse tones. You're still lovely, Kari. Still lovely as a girl. Rand grimaced. His mother had been dead 15 years. If Tam believed she was still alive, then the fever was even worse than Rand had thought. How could he be kept from speaking, now that silence might mean life? Mother wants you to be quiet, Rand whispered. He paused to clear his throat of a sudden tightness. She had had gentle hands. He remembered that much. Kari wants you to be quiet. Here, drink. Tam gulped thirstily from the water skin, but after a few seconds, he turned his head aside and began murmuring softly again, too low for Rand to understand. He hoped it was too low to be heard by hunting Trollocs, too. Hastily, he got on with what was needed. 3 of the blankets he wove around and between the shafts cut from the cart, contriving a makeshift litter. He would only be able to carry one end, letting the other drag on the ground, but it would have to do. From the last blanket, he cut a long strip with his belt knife, then tied one end of the strip to each of the shafts. As gently as he could, he lifted Tam onto the litter, wincing with every moan. His father had always seemed indestructible. Nothing could harm him, nothing could stop him, or even slow him down. For him to be in this condition almost robbed Rand of what courage he had managed to gather. But he had to keep on. That was all that kept him moving. He had to. When Tam finally lay on the litter, Rand hesitated, then took the sword belt from his father's waist. When he fastened it around himself, it felt odd there. It made him feel odd. Belt and sheath and sword together only weighed a few pounds, but when he sheathed the blade, it seemed to drag at him like a great weight. Angrily, he berated himself. This was no time or place for foolish fancies. It was only a big knife. How many times had he daydreamed about wearing a sword and having adventures? If he could kill one Trolloc with it, he could surely fight off any others as well. Only he knew all too well that what had happened in the farmhouse had been the purest luck. And his daydream adventures had never included his teeth chattering, or running for his life through the night, or his father at the point of death. Hastily he tucked the last blanket around Tam, and laid the water skin and the rest of the cloths beside his father on the litter. With a deep breath, he knelt between the shafts and lifted the strip of blanket over his head. It settled across his shoulders and under his arms. When he gripped the shafts and straightened, most of the weight was on his shoulders. It did not seem like very much. Trying to keep a smooth pace, he set out for Emmons Field, the litter scraping along behind him. He had already decided to make his way to the quarry road and follow that to the village. The danger would almost certainly be greater along the road, but Tam would receive no help at all if he got them lost trying to find his way through the woods in the dark. In the darkness, he was almost out onto the quarry road before he knew it. When he realized where he was, his throat tightened like a fist. Hurriedly, he turned the litter around and dragged it back into the trees away, then stopped to catch his breath and let his heart stop pounding. Still panting, he turned east toward Emmons Field. Traveling through the trees was more difficult than taking Tam down the road, and the night surely did not help. But going out onto the road itself would be madness. The idea was to reach the village without meeting any Trollocs, without even seeing any if he had his wish. He had to assume the Trollocs were still hunting them, and sooner or later they would realize the two had set off for the village. That was the most likely place to go, and the quarry road the most likely route. In truth, he found himself closer to the road than he liked. The night and the shadows under the trees seemed awfully bare cover in which to hide from the eyes of anyone traveling along it. Moonlight filtering through bare branches gave only enough illumination to fool his eyes into thinking they saw what was underfoot. Roots threatened to trip him at every step, old brambles snagged his legs, and sudden dips or rises in the ground had him half falling as his foot met nothing but air where he expected firm earth, or stumbling when his toe struck dirt while still moving forward. Tam's mutterings broke into a sharp groan whenever one of the shafts bumped too quickly over a root or rock. Uncertainty made him peer into the darkness until his eyes burned. Listen as he had never listened before. Every scrape of branch against branch, every rustle of pine needles, brought him to a halt, ears straining, hardly daring to breathe for fear he might not hear some warning sound, for fear he might hear that sound. Only when he was sure it was just the wind would he go on. Slowly weariness crept into his arms and legs, driven home by a night wind that mocked his cloak and coat. The weight of the litter, so little at the start, now tried to pull him to the ground. His stumbles were no longer all from tripping. The almost constant struggle not to fall took as much out of him as did the actual work of pulling the litter. He had been up before dawn to begin his chores, and even with the trip to Emmons Field, he had done almost a full day's work. On any normal night, he would be resting before the fireplace, reading one of Tam's small collection of books before going to bed. The sharp chill soaked into his bones, and his stomach reminded him that he had had nothing to eat since Mr. Salvier's honey cakes. He muttered to himself, angry at not taking some food at the farm. A few minutes more could not have made any difference. A few minutes to find some bread and cheese. The Trollocs would not have come back in just a few minutes more. Or just the bread. Of course, Mr. Salvier would insist on putting a hot meal in front of him once they reached the inn. A steaming plate of her thick lamb stew, probably. And some of that bread she'd been baking. And lots of hot tea. "It came over the dragon wall like a flood," Tam said suddenly in a strong, angry voice, "and washed the land with blood. How many died for Lemon's sin?" Rand almost fell from surprise. Wearily, he lowered the litter to the ground and untangled himself. The strip of blanket left a burning groove in his shoulders. Struggling to work the knots out, he knelt beside Tam. Fumbling for the water bag, he peered through the trees, trying vainly in the dim moonlight to see up and down the road, not 20 paces away. Nothing moved there but shadows. Nothing but shadows. "There isn't any flood of Trollocs, Father. Not now, anyway. We'll be safe in Emmons Field soon. Drink a little water." Tam brushed aside the water bag with an arm that seemed to have regained all of its strength. He seized Rand's collar, pulling him close enough to feel the heat of his father's fever in his own cheek. "They called them savages," Tam said urgently. "The fools said they could be swept aside like rubbish. How many battles lost, how many cities burned before they faced the truth, before the nations stood together against them?" He loosed his hold on Rand, and sadness filled his voice. "Feel that Marath, dead. The cries of ravens and the buzzing of flies. The topless towers of Cairhien, burning in the night like torches. All the way to the shining walls they burned and slew before they were turned back. All the way to..." Rand clamped a hand over his father's mouth. The sound came again. Thudding, directionless, fading, then growing stronger again as the wind shifted. Frowning, he turned his head slowly, trying to decide from where it came. A flicker of motion caught the corner of his eye, and in an instant he was crouched over Tam. He was startled to feel the hilt of the sword clutched tight in his hand, but most of him concentrated on the quarry road, as if the road were the only real thing in the entire world. Wavering shadows to the east slowly resolved themselves into a horse and rider, followed up the road by tall, bulky shapes trotting to keep up with the animal. The pale light of the moon glittered from spearheads and axe blades. Rand never even considered that they might be villagers coming to help. He knew what they were. He could feel it, like grit scraping his bones, even before they drew close enough for moonlight to reveal the hooded cloak swathing the horseman, a cloak that hung undisturbed by the wind. All of the shapes appeared black in the night, and the horse's hooves made the same sounds that any others would. But Rand knew this horse from any other. Behind the dark rider came nightmare forms with horns and muzzles and beaks. Trollocs in a double file, all in steps, boots and hooves striking the ground at the same instant as if obeying a single mind. Rand counted 20 as they ran past. He wondered what kind of man would dare turn his back on so many Trollocs, or on one, for that matter. The trotting column disappeared westward, thumping footfalls fading into the darkness. But Rand remained where he was, not moving a muscle except to breathe. Something told him to be certain, absolutely certain. They were gone before he moved. At long last, he drew a deep breath and began to straighten. This time the horse made no sound at all. In eerie silence, the dark rider returned, his shadowy mount stopping every few steps as it walked slowly back down the road. The wind gusted higher, moaning through the trees. The horseman's cloak lay still as death. Whenever the horse halted, that hooded head swung from side to side as the rider peered into the forest, searching. Exactly opposite Rand, the horse stopped again, the shattered opening of the hood turning toward where he crouched above his father. Rand's hand tightened convulsively on the sword hilt. He felt the gaze, just as he had that morning, and shivered again from the hatred, even if he could not see it. That shrouded man hated everyone and everything that lived. Despite the cold wind, sweat beaded on Rand's face. Then the horse was moving on, a few soundless steps, and stopped, until all Rand could see was a barely distinguishable blur in the night far down the road. It could have been anything, but he had not taken his eyes off it for a second. If he lost it, he was afraid the next time he saw the black-cloaked rider might be when that silent horse was on top of him. Abruptly, the shadow was rushing back, passing him in a silent gallop. The rider looked only ahead of him as he sped westward into the night, toward the mountains of mist, toward the farm. Rand sagged, gulping air and scrubbing cold sweat off his face with his sleeve. He did not care anymore about why the Trollocs had come. If he never found out why, that would be fine, just as long as it was all ended. With a shake, he gathered himself, hastily checking his father. Tam was still murmuring, but so softly, Rand could not make out the words. He tried to give him a drink, but the water spilled over his father's chin. Tam coughed and choked on the trickle that made it into his mouth, then began muttering again, as if there had not been any interruption. Rand splashed a little more water on the cloth on Tam's forehead, pushed the water bag back on the litter, and scrambled between the shafts again. He started out as if he had had a good night's sleep, but the new strength did not last long. Fear masked his tiredness in the beginning, but though the fear remained, the mask melted away quickly. Soon he was back to stumbling forward, trying to ignore hunger and aching muscles. He concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other without tripping. In his mind, he pictured Emmons Field, shutters thrown back and the houses lit for winter night, people shouting greetings as they passed back and forth on their visits, fiddles filling the streets with James Folly and Heron on the Wing. Harald Luhan would have one too many brandies and start singing The Wind in the Barley in a voice like a bullfrog. He always did, until his wife managed to shush him, and Sen Bui would decide to prove he could still dance as well as ever, and Matt would have something planned that would not quite happen the way he intended, and everybody would know he was responsible, even if no one could prove it. He could almost smile thinking about how it would be. After a time, Tam spoke up again. Aven Desora. It said it makes no seed, but they brought a cutting to Cairene, a sapling. A royal gift of wonder for the king. Though he sounded angry, he was barely loud enough for Rand to understand. Anyone who could hear him would be able to hear the litter scraping across the ground, too. Rand kept on, only half listening. They never make peace. Never. But they brought a sapling as a sign of peace.
500 years it grew. 500 years of peace with those who make no peace with strangers. Why did he cut it down? Why? Blood was the price for Avendor Aldera. Blood the price for Lamin's pride. He faded off into muttering once more. Tiredly, Rand wondered what fever dream Tam could be having now. Avendesora? The Tree of Life was supposed to have all sorts of miraculous qualities, but none of the stories mentioned any sapling, or any they. There was only the one, and that belonged to the Green Man. Only that morning he might have felt foolish at musing over the Green Man and the Tree of Life. They were only stories. Are they? Trollocs were just stories this morning. Maybe all the stories were as real as the news the peddlers and merchants brought. All the gleemen's tales and all the stories told at night in front of the fireplace. Next he might actually meet the Green Man, or an Ogier giant, or a wild, black-veiled Aiel man. Tam was talking again, he realized, sometimes only murmuring, sometimes loud enough to understand. From time to time he stopped to pant for breath, then went down as if he thought he had been speaking the whole time. Battles are always hot, even in the snow. Sweat heat, blood heat. Only death is cool. Slope of the mountain. Only place didn't stink of death. Had to get away from the smell of it, sight of it. Would a baby cry? The women fight alongside the men, sometimes. Why they had let her come, I don't... Gave birth there alone, before she died of her wounds. Covered the child with her cloak, but the wind blown the cloak away. Child blew with the cold. Should have been dead too, crying there, crying in the snow. I couldn't just leave a child. No children of our own. Always knew you wanted children. I knew you'd take it to your heart, Kari. Yes, lass. Rand is a good name. A good name. Suddenly Rand's legs lost the little strength they had. Stumbling, he fell to his knees. Tam moaned with the jolt, and the strip of blanket cut into Rand's shoulders, but he was not aware of either. If a Trolloc had leaped up in front of him right then, he would have just stared at it. He looked over his shoulder at Tam, who had sunk back into wordless murmurs. Fever dreams, he thought dully. Fevers always brought bad dreams, and this was a night for nightmares, even without a fever. You are my father, he said aloud, stretching back a hand to touch Tam, and I am... The fever was worse, much worse. Grimly, he struggled to his feet. Tam murmured something, but Rand refused to listen to any more. Throwing his weight against the improvised harness, he tried to put all of his mind into taking one leaden step after another, into reaching the safety of Emond's Field. But he could not stop the echo in the back of his mind. He's my father. It was just a fever dream. He's my father. It was just a fever dream. Light. Who am I? Chapter 7. Out of the Woods. Gray first light came while Rand still trudged through the forest. At first he did not really see. When he finally did, he stared at the fading darkness in surprise. No matter what his eyes told him, he could hardly believe he had spent all night trying to travel the distance from the farm to Emond's Field. Of course, the quarry road by day, rocks and all, was a far cry from the woods by night. On the other hand, it seemed days since he had seen the black-cloaked rider on the road, weeks since he and Tam had gone in for their supper. He no longer felt the strip of cloth digging into his shoulders, but then he felt nothing in his shoulders except numbness, nor in his feet, for that matter. In between, it was another matter. His breath came in labored pants that had long since set his throat and lungs to burning, and hunger twisted his stomach into queasy sickness. Tam had fallen silent some time before. Rand was not sure how long it had been since the murmurs ceased, but he did not dare halt now to check on Tam. If he stopped, he would never be able to force himself to start out again. Anyway, whatever Tam's condition, he could do nothing beyond what he was doing. The only hope lay ahead in the village. He tried wearily to increase his pace, but his wooden legs continued their slow plod. He barely even noticed the cold or the wind. Vaguely, he caught the smell of wood smoke. At least he was almost there if he could smell the village chimneys. The tired smile had only begun on his face, though, when it turned to a frown. Smoke lay heavy in the air. Too heavy.
With the weather, a fire might well be blazing away on every hearth in the village, but the smoke was still too strong. In his mind, he saw again the Trollocs on the road. Trollocs coming from the east, from the direction of Emond's Field. He peered ahead, trying to make out the first houses, and ready to shout for help at the first sight of anyone, even send Bowie or one of the Coplans. A small voice in the back of his head told him to hope someone there could still give help. Suddenly a house became visible through the last bare-branched trees, and it was all he could do to keep his feet moving. Hope turning to sharp despair, he staggered into the village. Charred piles of rubble stood in the places of half the houses of Emond's Field. Soot-coated brick chimneys thrust like dirty fingers from heaps of blackened timbers. Thin wisps of smoke still rose from the ruins. Grimy-faced villagers, some yet in their night clothes, poked through the ashes, here pulling free a cookpot, there simply prodding forlornly at the wreckage with a stick. What little had been rescued from the flames dotted the streets. Tall mirrors and polished sideboards and high chests stood in the dust among chairs and tables, buried under bedding, cooking utensils, and meager piles of clothing and personal belongings. The destruction seemed scattered at random through the village. 5 houses marched untouched in one row, while in another place, a lone survivor stood surrounded by desolation. On the far side of the wine-spring water, the 3 huge Beltane bonfires roared, tended by a cluster of men. Thick columns of black smoke bent northward with the wind, flecked by careless sparks. One of Master Alvir's Duran stallions was dragging something Rand could not make out over the ground toward the wagon bridge and the flames. Before he was well out of the trees, a sooty-faced Harald Luhan hurried to him, clutching a woodsman's axe in one thick-fingered hand. The burly blacksmith's ash-smeared nightshirt hung to his boots, the angry red welt of a burn across his chest showing through a ragged tear. He dropped to one knee beside the litter. Tam's eyes were closed and his breathing came low and hard.
"Trollocs, boy?"
Master Luhan asked in a smoke-hoarse voice.
Here too. Here too.
Well, we may have been luckier than anyone has a right to be, if you can credit it.
He needs the wisdom. Now where in the light is she? Egwene!
Egwene, running by with her arms full of bedsheets torn into bandages, looked around at them without slowing. Her eyes stared at something in the far distance. Dark circles made them appear even larger than they actually were. Then she saw Rand and stopped, drawing a shuddering breath. "Oh no, Rand! Not your father! Is he... Come, I'll take you to Nynaeve." Rand was too tired, too stunned to speak. All through the night, Emond's Field had been a haven where he and Tam would be safe. Now all he could seem to do was stare in dismay at her smoke-stained dress. He noticed odd details as if they were very important. The buttons down the back of her dress were done up crookedly, and her hands were clean. He wondered why her hands were clean when smudges of soot marked her cheeks. Master Luhan seemed to understand what had come over him. Laying his axe across the shafts, the blacksmith picked up the rear of the litter and gave it a gentle push, prodding him to follow Egwene. He stumbled after her as if walking in his sleep. Briefly he wondered how Master Luhan knew the creatures were Trollocs, but it was a fleeting thought. If Tam could recognize them, there was no reason why Harald Luhan could not. "All the stories are real," he muttered.
"So it seems, lad,"
the blacksmith said.
"So it seems."
Rand only half heard. He was concentrating on following Egwene's slender shape. He had pulled himself together just enough to wish she would hurry, though in truth she was keeping her pace to what the 2 men could manage with their burden. She led them halfway down the green to the Calder house. Char blackened the edges of its thatch, and smut stained the whitewashed walls. Of the houses on either side, only the foundation stones were left, and 2 piles of ash and burned timbers. One had been the house of Baron Thane, one of the Miller's brothers. The other had been Abel Coffin's, Matt's father. Even the chimneys had toppled. "Wait here," Egwene said, and gave them a look as if expecting an answer. When they only stood there, she muttered something under her breath, then dashed inside. "Matt?" Rand said. "Is he?"
"He's alive,"
the blacksmith said. He set down his end of the litter and straightened slowly. "I saw him only a little while ago. It's a wonder any of us are alive. The way they came after my house in the forge, you'd have thought I had gold and jewels in there. All's but cracked one's skull with a frying pan. She took one look at the ashes of our house this morning and set out hunting around the village with the biggest hammer she could dig out of what's left of the forge, just in case any of them hid instead of running away. I could almost pity the thing if she finds one. He nodded to the Calder house. Mistress Calder and a few others took in some of those who were hurt, the ones with no home of their own still standing. When the Wisdom's seen Tam, we'll find him a bed. The inn, maybe. The mayor offered it already, but Nynaeve said the hurt folk would heal better if there weren't so many of them together. Rand sank to his knees. Shrugging out of his blanket harness, he wearily busied himself with checking
how's everyone doing this evening?
Tam never moved or made a sound, even when Rand's wooden hands jostled him. But he was still breathing, at least. My father. The other was just the fever talking. What if they come back? He said dully. The wheel weaves as the wheel wills, Master Luhan said uneasily. If they come back, well, they're gone now. So we pick up the pieces, build up what's been torn down. He sighed, his face going slack as he knuckled the small of his back. For the first time, Rand realized that the heavy-set man was as tired as he was himself, if not more so. The blacksmith looked at the village, shaking his head. I don't suppose today will be much of a bell time, but we'll make it through. We always have. Abruptly, he took up his axe, and his face firmed. There's work waiting for me. Don't you worry, lad. The Wisdom will take good care of him, and the light will take care of us all. And if the light doesn't, well, we'll just take care of ourselves. Remember, we're Two Rivers folk. Still on his knees, Rand looked at the village as the blacksmith walked away. Really looked for the first time. Master Luhan was right, he thought, and was surprised that he was not surprised by what he saw. People still dug in the ruins of their homes, but even in the short time he had been there, more of them had begun to move with a sense of purpose. He could almost feel the growing determination. But, he wondered, they had seen Trollocs. Had they seen the black-cloaked rider? Had they felt his hatred? Nynaeve and Egwene appeared from the Calder house, and he sprang to his feet. Or rather, he tried to spring to his feet. It was more of a stumbling lurch that almost put him on his face in the dust. The Wisdom dropped to her knees beside the litter without giving him so much as a glance. Her face and dress were even dirtier than Egwene's, and the same dark circles lined her eyes, though her hands too were clean. She felt Tam's face and thumbed open his eyelids. With a frown, she pulled down the coverings and eased the bandage aside to look at the wound. Before Rand could see what lay underneath, she had replaced the wadded cloth. Sighing, she smoothed the blanket and cloak back up to Tam's neck with a gentle touch, as if tucking a child in for the night. There's nothing I can do, she said. She had to put her hands on her knees to straighten up. I'm sorry, Rand. For a moment he stood, not understanding, as she started back to the house. Then he scrambled after her and pulled her around to face him. He's dying, he cried. I know, she said simply, and he sagged with the matter-of-factness of it. You have to do something. You have to. You're the Wisdom. Pain twisted her face, but only for an instant. Then she was all hollow-eyed resolve again, her voice emotionless and firm. Yes, I am. I know what I can do with my medicines, and I know when it's too late. Don't you think I would do something if I could? But I can't. I can't, Rand. And there are others who need me. People I can help. I brought him to you as quickly as I could, he mumbled. Even with the village in ruins, there had been the wisdom for hope. With that gone, he was empty. I know you did, she said gently. She touched his cheek with her hand. It isn't your fault. You did the best anyone could. I am sorry, Rand, but I have others to tend to. Our troubles are just beginning, I'm afraid. Vacantly, he stared after her until the door of the house closed behind her. He could not make any thought come, except that she would not help. Suddenly, he took a step as Egwene cannoned into him, throwing her arms around him. Her hug was hard enough to bring a grunt from him at the time. Now he only looked silently at the door behind which his hopes had vanished. I'm so sorry, Rand, she said against his chest. Light, I wish there was something I could do. Numbly, he put his arms around her. I know. I have to do something, Egwene. I don't know what, but I can't just let him... His voice broke, and she hugged him harder. Egwene! At Nynaeve's shout from the house, Egwene jumped. Egwene, I need you! And wash your hands again! She pushed herself free from Rand's arms. She needs my help, Rand. Egwene! He thought he heard a sob as she spun away from him. Then she was gone, and he was left alone beside the litter. For a moment he looked down at Tam, feeling nothing but hollow helplessness. Suddenly his face hardened. The mayor will know what to do, he said, lifting the shafts once more. The mayor will know. Bran al'Vere always knew what to do. With weary obstinacy, he set out for the Wine Spring Inn. Another of the Duran stallions passed him, its harness straps tied around the ankles of a big shape, draped with a dirty blanket. Arms covered with coarse hair dragged in the dirt behind the blanket, and one corner was pushed up to reveal a goat's horn. The Two Rivers was no place for stories to become horribly real. If Trollocs belonged anywhere, it was in the world outside, for places where they had Aes Sedai and false dragons, and the light alone knew what else come to life out of the tales of Gleeman. Not the Two Rivers, not Emond's Field. As he made his way down the green, people called to him, some from the ruins of their homes, asking if they could help. He heard them only as murmurs in the background, even when they walked alongside him for a distance as they spoke.
Give me 1 second, I want to be right back.
Words that said he needed no help, that everything was being taken care of. When they left him, with worried looks and sometimes a comment about sending Nynaeve to him, he noticed that just as little. All he let himself be aware of was the purpose he had fixed in his head. Bran al'Vere could do something to help Tam. What that could be, he tried not to dwell on. But the mayor would be able to do something, to think of something. The inn had almost completely escaped the destruction that had taken half the village. A few scorch marks marred its walls, but the red roof tiles glittered in the sunlight as brightly as ever. All that was left of the peddler's wagon, though, were blackened iron wheel rims leaning against the charred wagon box, now on the ground. The big round hoops that had held up the canvas cover slanted crazily, each at a different angle. Tom Merrilin sat cross-legged on the old foundation stones, carefully snipping singed edges from the patches on his cloak with a pair of small scissors. He set down cloak and scissors when Rand drew near. Without asking if Rand needed or wanted help, he hopped down and picked up the back of the litter.
Inside? Of course. Don't you worry, boy. Your wisdom will take care of him. I've watched her work since last night, and she has a deft touch and a sure skill. It could be a lot worse. Some died last night. Not many, perhaps, but any at all are too many for me. Old Fane just disappeared, and that's the worst of all. Trollocs will eat anything. You should thank the light your father is still here, and alive for the wisdom to heal.
Rand blotted out the words, "He is my father," reducing the voice to meaningless sound that he noticed no more than a fly's buzzing. He could not bear any more sympathy, any more attempts to boost his spirits. Not now. Not until Bran al'Vere told him how to help Tam. Suddenly he found himself facing something scrawled on the inn door. A curving line scratched with a charred stick. A charcoal teardrop balanced on its point. So much had happened that it hardly surprised him to find the dragon's fang marked on the door of the Wine Spring Inn. Why anyone would want to accuse the innkeeper or his family of evil, or bring the inn bad luck, was beyond him. But the night had convinced him of one thing. Anything was possible. Anything at all. At a push from the Gleeman, he lifted the latch and went in. The common room was empty except for Bran al'Vere, and cold too, for no one had found time to lay a fire. The mayor sat at one of the tables, dipping his pen in an inkwell with a frown of concentration on his face, and his gray-fringed head bent over a sheet of parchment. Nightshirt tucked hastily into his trousers, and bagging around his considerable waist, he absently scratched at one bare foot with the toes of the other. His feet were dirty, as if he had been outside once without bothering about boots, despite the cold.
What's your trouble?
He demanded without looking up.
Be quick with it. I have 24 things to do right this minute, and more that should have been done an hour ago. So I have little time or patience. Well, out with it.
Master al'Vere, Rand said. It's my father. The mayor's head jerked up. Rand! Tam! He threw down the pen and knocked over his chair as he leaped up.
Perhaps the light hasn't abandoned us altogether. I was afraid you were both dead.
Ellie galloped into the village an hour after the Trollocs left, lathered and blowing as if she'd run all the way from the farm. And I thought, no time for that now. We'll take him upstairs. He seized the rear of the litter, shouldering the Gleeman out of the way. You go get the wisdom, Master Merlin, and tell her I said hurry, or I'll know the reason why. Rest easy, Tom. We'll soon have you in a good soft bed. Go, Gleeman, go! Tom Merlin vanished through the doorway before Rand could speak. And Eve wouldn't do anything. She said she couldn't help him. I knew. I hoped you'd think of something. Master Alvear looked at Tam more sharply, then shook his head. We'll see, boy. We'll see. But he no longer sounded confident. Let's get him into a bed. He can rest easy, at least. Rand let himself be prodded toward the stairs at the back of the common room. He tried hard to keep his certainty that somehow Tam would be all right. But it had been thin to begin with, he realized, and the sudden doubt in the mayor's voice shook him. On the second floor of the inn, at the front, were half a dozen snug, well-appointed rooms with windows overlooking the green. Mostly they were used by the peddlers, or people down from Watch Hill or up from Devon Ride. But the merchants who came each year were often surprised to find such comfortable rooms. 3 of them were taken now, and the mayor hurried Rand to one of the unused ones. Quickly the down comforter and blankets were stripped back on the wide bed, and Tam was transferred to the thick feather mattress, with goose-down pillows tucked under his head. He made no sound beyond hoarse breathing as he was moved, not even a groan, but the mayor brushed away Rand's concern, telling him to set a fire to take the chill off the room. While Rand dug wood and kindling from the wood box next to the fireplace, Rand threw back the curtains on the room, letting in the morning light, then began to gently wash Tam's face. By the time the Gleeman returned, the blaze on the hearth was warming the room. She will not come, Tom Merlin announced as he stalked into the room. He glared at Rand, his bushy white brows drawing down sharply. You didn't tell me she had seen him already. She almost took my head off. I thought, I don't know, maybe the mayor could do something, could make her see. Hands clenched in anxious fists, Rand turned from the fireplace to Bran. Master Alvear, what can I do? The rotund man shook his head helplessly. He laid a freshly dampened cloth on Tam's forehead and avoided meeting Rand's eye. I can't just watch him die, Master Alvear. I have to do something. The Gleeman shifted as if to speak. Rand rounded on him eagerly. Do you have an idea? I'll try anything. I was just wondering, Tom said, tamping his long-stemmed pipe with his thumb. If the mayor knew who scrawled the dragon's fang on his door. He peered into the bowl, then looked at Tam and replaced the unlit pipe between his teeth with a sigh. Someone seems not to like him anymore. Or maybe it's his guests they don't like. Rand gave him a disgusted look and turned away to stare into the fire. His thoughts danced like the flames, and like the flames, they concentrated fixedly on one thing. He would not give up. He could not just stand there and watch Tam die. My father, he thought fiercely. My father. Once the fever was gone, that could be cleared up as well. But the fever first. Only how? Bran Alvear's mouth tightened as he looked at Rand's back, and the glare he directed at the Gleeman would have given a bear pause, but Tom just waited expectantly, as if he had not noticed it. It's probably the work of one of the Congers or a Coplin, the mayor said finally. Though the light alone knows which. They're a large brood, and if there's ill to be said of someone, or even if there isn't, they'll say it. They make Sen Bui sound honey-tongued. That wagon load who came in just before dawn? The Gleeman asked. They hadn't so much as smelled a Trolloc, and all they wanted to know was when festival was going to start, as if they couldn't see half the village in ashes. Master Alvear nodded grimly. One branch of the family, but none of them are very different. That fool Darl Coplin spent half the night demanding I put Mistress Moraine and the Master Lan out of the inn, out of the village, as if there would be any village at all without them. Rand had only half listened to the conversation, but this last tugged him to speak. What did they do? Why, she called ball lightning out of the clear night sky, Master Alvear replied. Sent it darting straight at the Trollocs. You've seen trees shattered by it, but Trollocs stood it no better. Moraine? Rand said incredulously, and the mayor nodded. Mistress Moraine. And Master Lan was a whirlwind with that sword of his. His sword?
The man himself is a weapon, and in 10 places at once, or so it seemed. Burn me, but I still wouldn't believe it if I couldn't step outside and see.
He rubbed a hand over his bald head.
Winter night visits just beginning, our hands full of presents and honey cakes and our heads full of wine. Then the dogs snarling, and suddenly the two of them burst out of the inn, running through the village shouting about Trollocs. I thought they'd had too much wine. After all, Trollocs? Then, before anyone knew what was happening, those things were right in the streets with us, slashing at people with their swords, torching houses, howling to freeze a man's blood.
He made a sound of disgust in his throat.
We just ran like chickens with a fox in the hen yard till Master Land put some backbone into us. No need to be so hard, Tom said. You did as well as anyone could. Not every Trolloc lying out there fell to the two of them. Yes, well, Master Albir gave himself a shake. It's still almost too much to believe. An Aes Sedai in Emond's Field, and Master Lan is a warder.
An Aes Sedai? Rand whispered. She can't be. I talked to her. She isn't. She doesn't.
Did you think they wore signs? The mayor said wryly. Aes Sedai painted across their backs, and maybe danger, stay away? Suddenly he slapped his forehead. Aes Sedai. I'm an old fool and losing my wits. There's a chance, Rand, if you're willing to take it. I can't tell you to do it, and I don't know if I'd have the nerve if it were me.
Chance? Rand said. I'll take any chance if it'll help.
Aes Sedai can heal, Rand. Heard me, lad, you've heard the stories. They can cure where medicines fail. Gleeman, you should have remembered that better than I. Gleeman's tales are full of Aes Sedai. Why didn't you speak up instead of letting me flail around? I'm a stranger here, Tom said, looking longingly at his unlit pipe. And Goodman Copland isn't the only one who wants nothing to do with Aes Sedai. Best the idea came from you.
Aes Sedai, Rand muttered, trying to make the woman who had smiled at him fit the stories. Help from an Aes Sedai was sometimes worse than no help at all, so the stories said, like poison in a pie. And their gifts always had a hook in them, like fish bait. Suddenly the coin in his pocket, the coin Moraine had given him, seemed like a burning coal. It was all he could do not to rip it out of his coat and throw it out the window.
Nobody wants to get involved with Aes Sedai, lad, the mayor said slowly. It is the only chance I can see, but it's still no small decision. I cannot make it for you, but I have seen nothing but good from Mistress Moraine. Moraine Sedai, I should call her, I suppose. Sometimes,
he gave a meaningful look at Tam.
You have to take a chance, even if it's a poor one. Some of the stories are exaggerated in a way, Tom added, as if the words were being dragged from him. Some of them. Besides, boy, what choice do you have?
None, Rand sighed. Tam still had not moved a muscle. His eyes were sunken as if he had been sick a week. I'll go find her.
The other side of the bridges, the Gleeman said, where they are disposing of the dead Trollocs.
But be careful, boy. Aes Sedai do what they do for reasons of their own, and they aren't always the reasons others think. But be careful, boy.
The last was a shout that followed Rand through the door. He had to hold on to the sword hilt to keep the scabbard from tangling in his legs as he ran, but he would not take the time to remove it. He clattered down the stairs and dashed out of the inn, tiredness forgotten for the moment. The chance for Tam, however small, was enough to overcome a night without sleep, for a time at least. That the chance came from an Aes Sedai, or what the price of it might be, he did not want to consider. And as for actually facing an Aes Sedai, he took a deep breath and tried to move faster. The bonfire stood well beyond the last houses to the north on the west side of the road to Watch Hill. The wind still carried the oily black columns of smoke away from the village, but even so, a sickly sweet stink filled the air, like a roast left hours too long on the spit. Rand gagged at the smell, then swallowed hard when he realized its source. A fine thing to do with Beltane fires. The men tending the fires had cloths tied over their noses and mouths, but their grimaces made it plain the vinegar dampening the cloths was not enough. Even if it did kill the stench, they still knew the stench was there, and they still knew what they were doing.
Two of the men were untying the harness straps of one of the big Durans from a Trollocs ankles. Lan, squatting beside the body, had tossed back the blanket enough to reveal the Trollocs' shoulders and goat-snouted head. As Rand trotted up, the warder unfastened a metal badge, a blood-red enameled trident from one spiked shoulder of the Trollocs' shirt of black mail. Kobol, he announced. He bounced the badge on his palm and snatched it out of the air with a growl. That makes 7 bands so far. Moraine, seated cross-legged on the ground a short distance off, shook her head tiredly. A walking staff covered from end to end in carved vines and flowers lay across her knees, and her dress had the rumpled look of having been worn too long. 7 bands. 7. That many have not acted together since the Trolloc Wars. Bad news piles on bad news. I'm afraid, Lan. I thought we had gained a march, but we may be further behind than ever. Rand stared at her, unable to speak. Aes Sedai. He had been trying to convince himself that she would not look any different now that he knew what he was looking at. Surprised, she did not. She was no longer pristine, not with wisps of hair out in all directions, and a faint streak of soot across her nose, yet not really different either. Surely there must be something about an Aes Sedai to mark her for what she was. On the other hand, if outward appearance reflected what was inside, and if the stories were true, then she should look closer to a Trolloc than to a more than handsome woman whose dignity was not dented by sitting in the dirt. And she could help Tam. Whatever the cost, there was that before anything else. He took a deep breath. Mistress Moraine. Moraine Sedai. Both turned to look at him, and he froze under her gaze. Not the calm, smiling gaze he remembered from the Green. Her face was tired, but her dark eyes were Hawk's eyes. Sedai, breakers of the world, puppeteers who pulled strings and made nations dance in designs only the women from Tar Valon knew. A little more light in the darkness, the Aes Sedai murmured. She raised her voice. How are your dreams, Rand al'Thor? He stared at her. My dreams? A night like that can give a man bad dreams, Rand. If you have nightmares, you must tell me of it. I can help with bad dreams sometimes. There's nothing wrong with It's my father. He's hurt. It's not much more than a scratch, but the fever is burning him up. The wisdom won't help. She says she can't. But the stories... She raised an eyebrow, and he stopped and swallowed hard. Light. Is there a story with an Aes Sedai where she isn't a villain? He looked at the warder, but Lan appeared more interested than in anything Rand might. Fumbling his way under her eyes, he went on. It said Aes Sedai. If you can help him, anything you can do for him, whatever the cost. He took it and finished up in a rush. I'll pay any price in my power if you help him. Anything. Any price, Moraine mused, half to herself. We will speak of prices later, Rand, if at all. I can make no promises. Your wisdom knows what she is about. I will do what I can, but it is beyond my power to stop the wheel from turning. Death comes sooner or later to everyone, the warder said grimly. Unless they serve the Dark One, and only fools are willing to pay that price. Moraine made a clucking sound. Do not be so gloomy, Lan. We have some reason to celebrate. A small one, but a reason. She used the staff to pull herself to her feet. Take me to your father, Rand. I will help him as much as I am able. Too many here have refused to let me help at all. They have heard the stories too, she added dryly. He's at the inn, Rand said. This way. And thank you. Thank you. They followed, but his pace took him quickly ahead. He slowed impatiently for them to catch up, then darted ahead again and had to wait again. Please hurry, he urged, so caught up in actually getting help for Tam that he never considered the temerity of prodding an Aes Sedai. The fever is burning him up. Lan glared at him. Can't you see she's tired? Even with an Angreal, what she did last night was like running around the village with a sack of stones on her back. I don't know that you are worth it, sheepherder, no matter what she says. Rand blinked and held his tongue.
Gently, my friend,
Moraine said. Without slowing her pace, she reached up to pat the warder's shoulder. He towered over her protectively, as if he could give her strength just by being close. You think only of taking care of me. Why should he not think the same of his father? Lance scowled, but fell silent. I'm coming as quickly as I can, Rand, I promise you. The fierceness of her eyes, or the calm of her voice, not gentle exactly, more firmly in command. Rand did not know which to believe. Or perhaps they did go together. Aes Sedai. He was committed now. He matched his stride to theirs and tried not to think of what the price might be that they would talk about later. Chapter 8. A place of...
Alright, everyone. I'm going to call into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone stopping by. Everyone continues to stop by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe.